Hello techies, I'm Divya here. On behalf of CyberBrainer, don't you think the world of tech is evolving faster than ever? Now is the perfect time to dive in and build the skills that will take you places. With CyberBrainer, we are putting you in the driver's seat of your own future. We at CyberBrainer don't just teach your interest. We believe that knowledge is power, but it's applied knowledge that truly sets you apart. Whether you're diving into data science, mastering artificial intelligence, or exploring the world of cybersecurity, our courses are designed to give you the skills that matter. So let's jump into the session and make the future yours today. Thank you.
There are just a couple more stages which are left. The first one is a group by stage. What is a group by stage? And then we have a similar stage called filter. Let's go to DS to read. This is our final derived data set that we had achieved. This is our derived dataset DDSO3. If I look at the lineage, this is where we are. Right now I want to edit this. And I can add a couple of other stages. The first stage that I can add is a group by stage. What is a group by stage? As the name suggests, it allows me to group my data based on different factors. As an example, let's say I wanted to group all of my employees. Who are? Let's say based on their age group. Right, or based on their management level, or based on any of the other factors. Then I'll go ahead and create a group by stage. Right group by state is simply an aggregation or an aggregation function in Workday. Group by stage. This stage. Allows you to summarize. Or aggregate. In right using different functions. Now I want to group based on the different age groups. I'll go ahead and add a group by stage. Right in group by stage, I want to group based on the age group. I'll scroll down and I'm selecting age group. When I do that, system shows me all the different age groups. Can you show me? Sorry, I missed that age group. How did you select that one? I was trying to follow. I have added a new group by stage. Right, and for group by stage, I have to specify the field or the value based on which I want to group or aggregate. Right now, I'll select one or more aggregation fields. I want to group based on, let's say, the age group. Or maybe the gender. I want to understand the gender distribution. I'm selecting gender. The moment I do, that system shows me the default aggregation of count. It is showing me all gender values wherever you have a null. There are many employees who do not have a gender defined. Right. Maybe their gender was not included or specified, or maybe they did not reveal their gender. It doesn't matter. There are 3 groupings that are being created for gender. One for each of the gender values, which is male and female, or anything else which is defined. Plus one grouping is created if there are any null values. The Workday automatically creates a grouping for null. Null is something wherein your value is not defined. And the default summarization. As I mentioned, the grouping happens in terms of different summarization functions. What are those functions? The functions are OIO summarization fields, the default one is always count. If you do not add any summarization, Workday by default uses count as the summarization field. What is Workday doing for each of these groupings? It is simply adding the count of employees. Now for this grouping, you actually don't need the count. You want, let's say, the average of the groupings. Let's say there. Now for any of these summarizations, if you see, even though I have a lot of fields, when I'm trying to do a summarization, it only gives me a few selected fields. For any summarization, it only gives you numeric or currency fields, right? Obviously, you cannot go ahead and summarize a text, right, or a date. What are the different summarizations available? You can do a count. You can find average. You can find minimum. You can find maximum. You can do a sum. For example, you can find average salary of employees across genders. Now, I've selected average as the summarization. The default one, as I mentioned, is always count. I want to find. If you don't mind, can I interrupt you a second? For this group by, for example, if I see the SQL query, you are doing the subquery. It acts like that. The group by, here the concept of group by. If you see the SQL query, you create a SQL query with a subquery that you will create averages or the sum of any of the elements based on a couple of dimensions. You try to create a SQL query. Internally how it acts, I'm not sure. Because of this, we have not worked on SQL queries. Is there any way to create a SQL query or no? It won't work. I don't know how internally Workday is getting this. Probably that is how it works. But it looks like they have created options to, like right now, if you drag a data or anything from the database or creating aggregations or anything, we try to create a customer SQL query and try to pull the data out for the extractions. That the functionality is trying to do here makes sense. There are different summarization functions. I want to get us average of total base pay for my males, for my females. And that's what I'm doing now. If you see for females, it is no longer using count as the default summarization. It is using average of the total basic salary. This is how I can do different summarizations. In addition to gender, I also want to group based on within a gender. I want to group based on management level. How many of these are managers? How many of these are employees, and on and forth. Based on that, if you see again, it does the grouping. Females who are managers, their average base salary is 0. Probably there are no females who are managers. Female who are director, Their average total base pay is this. Female supervisor this. Males null this. It automatically does that grouping based on the grouping fields you have selected. I can add any number of grouping values I want to. Right. Within this, maybe I want to do a grouping based on employee's country. And then I would select country, and then it adds one more level of grouping. Right. Females who are managers in India. And then the associated total base pay or average base pay. And on a fourth. Right. Group by function is, simply put, a summarization function. It allows me to get those summarizations. The averages, maxes, minimum sums, and on and forth. If I don't specify anything, the default is obviously the count. Right. Count simply gets me the count of workers. There are 2 managers in Japan who are male. That's what this summarization is getting. Alright. Group by is created to identify different summarizations for different groupings. What are the different options we have count? These are all delivered ones. We cannot add a new one. And finally we have sum. I want to get the sum of total base pay. I'll take sum. And all of these summarizations, they always happen on a numeric field or in a currency field. We'll see what are these different field types in a bit. I want to get a sum of the total base pay. I have a question. When I'm checking the lineage, whenever I see the data catalog, I see all the data sets and everything. But how do I know this is the final data set? For example, right now, when we created, we know that data 1 to 3, you created data 5 and that is a final one. When I click on the data 5, it will show go for lineage. It will show the complete architecture for me. But if I look at the data 1 or 3 or don't show fully lineage, how do I know that? This is my final derived data, that is our complete. Your final derived data is what is actually getting published. But right now, we have not published anything because it is your final data that you make it available for analysis. There's one more way to identify, and this is something we discussed right in the beginning. When you click on any dataset, it shows you where the dataset is being imported. If you see this dataset is getting imported into DDSSO3, that means this is not final. It is still getting imported somewhere else. Whereas if you click on DDSO3, it is not getting imported anywhere. Either imported by you can select for or not published. Anything is published or published because only you will publish your final dataset, right? Not any intermediate one. We're going to check that. That is a group by stage. Now, in addition to this, we can also define a filter stage now. As the name suggests, it allows me to fill. I'll go ahead and cancel this. Obviously, I don't need to do any. The purpose of our example, we're not doing any grouping. I just wanted to show this to you. Once I say done, this would be my final. Final put. Cancel this. Now I want to filter some data based on any criteria. Then I can add a filter stage. What is a filter stage? As the name suggests, this stage allows me to filter my data. It is simply a selection criteria or a filter criteria. Right. Let's take some examples. Let's see what else is. What is there? Alright, maybe I want to filter all data. Within supervisory organizations are not available, or maybe worker value itself is black. I want to quickly check if there is any such. Let's see this record. Let's take a random example. I see here, for this one is like the derived dataset one. Now you want to create this derived dataset for the aggregating of whatever the gender based to sum of the water. The count you want. You are creating the derived dataset for that one. That purpose, then the disadvantage of being using this one is because here you have to make the joins, pull the data from the table, everything. For example, you have many records in the end, records in. After that you are in the aggregations. Not really. Your aggregation can be done on base data set as well. I'm just showing that to you. But if you remember, you can do aggregation on base data set. There are 3 stages that are applicable for base data set as well. Let's open this base data set as an example. You can add a group by stage. You can add a filter stage and manage field stage. These 3 stages can be done on a base data set as well. It's just that I'm talking about this now. I'm comparing with the SQL to this one. What is the pros and cons with using SQL or using this Windows Prism? One is the advantage is definitely the layman can enable to do it knowing the tool instead of learning your SQL language. Group by stage can also be done directly on a base data set. All that is possible. It's just that I'm talking about these. As the name suggests, filter stage allows you to filter your data right forward. As you mentioned, one of the reason is performance. Other reason is maybe you want to filter out all null values. Maybe you are doing some analytics only for certain region or on and forth. I want to filter only for Europe. Let's say I'll click on add stage and add a filter. Right now there are 2 options, if on, if any. I can define one or more filter conditions. For example, I want to add a filter. Let me show that once again. I want to add a filter stage. I have added a stage. And then I'll click on this add filter button. Here I'm selecting the filter saying company name and then I have the operator. I can say is not blank or is blank, or I can select one or more options. I'm saying is in the list. And in the list I'll say get me only those companies. And these, it shows me all the values from the tenant. And I'm selecting Europe. There I'll say is equal to. This the business object. And successful search. The standard to ready. It is getting me the same results. If you see now, it is getting me all rows. But in the company name is Europe. That's because in this tenant there are probably hundreds and thousands of companies defined. It only is giving me, it seems, the first 500 companies. Instead of doing that, what I've done is I have filtered based on the view ID. View ID is a unique identifier. It's referred to as a Workday ID. There can be multiple companies with the same name or multiple employees with the same name, but each employee would have a unique employee ID. This ID is equivalent to the employee ID for a worker. It's because I was not able to directly find or filter on the company name. I have filtered on the company view ID. And if you see, the end result is basically the same thing. No, I am. I want to say if company ID is equal to this, and let's say employee is a male, just a hypothetical example. I can add additional filter and then select. Let's say gender is equal to it because here there are only 3 values. It shows me 3. For company name, there are probably hundreds and thousands of values, but still it should search. I don't know why it was not able to fetch me. Here I'm saying email. Now my filter refreshes. And now if I go in here, it is only giving me those employees who are actually male. And the reason for that is I have selected the option if all. If all is simply an uncondition. Right? I'm basically saying get me all records where company work. The ID or company name is Europe and the employee's gender is a male. Instead of saying if all, I could have said if any, which is basically an or condition. Right? You can define and condition or condition in between my different. Now, if you see, if I get the gender, it is getting me females as well. Right. With respect to filter, I have the option to define if any or if all options. Right. The next stage is your filter stage, and you can define filters. Obviously, it is not as flexible as an SQL. Within SQL, you can define anything. But then, as you yourself mentioned, it is easy to learn. It's simple user interface. It's easy for the fresher to learn, but it's hard for the experienced people to learn. How is it? Because our terminology is totally makes sense. That is always true. Any new technology, because we already have know it in a certain manner. And then we basically relearn something, right? You can feel anything. This lead with the lines is very hard to keep it in a straight. Exactly. When you already know something, then obviously it becomes difficult. Sure, we have created our datasets using custom reports. We have created our datasets using file. We have also created our dataset. We did not create anything, but we have discussed that we can create our datasets using SFTP servers or SFTP by reading a file from SFTP as well. Now, if you remember when we created any dataset, Workday would automatically go ahead and identify the field types. Right? Whenever you create a dataset, Workday automatically identifies the field types, which is what defines the schema of the dataset. What is the schema for dataset? It is all the columns or fields in a dataset and the associated field types. Let's look at the dataset field types. When a dataset is right, Workday determines the schema. Of the dataset. Right now, when you create a dataset, using a custom report, which is what we did right, we created 3 base datasets using custom report. Workday basically maps the Workday field types to dataset field types. Because we have created a Workday report which is also part of Workday. And then we are using that custom report to create our dataset. When this happens, Workday simply does this mapping between the custom report field types and the dataset field types. The second thing, when you create a dataset, and we'll see what this mapping looks like. When you create a data using external data, then this is what Workday does. And if you remember some of these fields, for example, date fields, wherein we were reading vesting dates and then employee IDs as well. Employee IDs, Workday had mapped it to integer. And then we remapped it to text. And similarly, the vesting date is 1st of Jan 2021, 1st of Jan 2022. They were all mapped as text, and then we remapped it to dates. Right? When you create a data set using external data, it could be a file. It could be a file from SFTP server. Workday basically attempts to guess the field of each field by examining some of the data. This is what Workday does. It will examine what data is being loaded. And based on the data that is being loaded in that particular column or in that particular field, Workday would do a best attempt guess and then assign the appropriate field type. For employee ID, because it was all numbers 2, 1, 1, 0, 1, 1 and similar to that, Workday simply assumed that employee ID is a numeric value. I come here. Let's simply check, because these are all numbers. It is a numeric value. But in Workday, we can also have employee IDs, which are characters, right? Many companies have an employee ID. For example, my employee ID is RB and then 1234, just as an example. We know that employee IDs could be text as well. Right? However, when Workday identified it identified it as integer. Right? Workday simply reads data and then determines the field types. As we mentioned, you can always change the field type if Workday assigned V. Or for whatever reasons. What are the field types that are available in Workday? Or first, let's look at the dataset field types. What are the different field types which are available? The first one is Boolean, which is simply a true or false, or yes or no. Right? The first field type is a Boolean, which is simply yes or no, 1 or 0, true or false. Whatever you want to consider it. The second one is your date. Right? We have a number of numeric field types. Here we have numeric. We have integer. And we have double. And then we have currency. How is currency field different from a numeric field? A currency field is a combination of number, which is the numeric value. Don't worry about the data type field types. It is always there in everything, right? Don't worry about that. The fifth one is a text. And then we have the instance field. And what is the instance field? Instance. What do you mean by instance? What is an instance field? Now, everything in Workday is actually an instance. What is an instance? For example, are you aware of object-oriented programming? For example, Java. In Java, similar to Workday, is a completely object-oriented based language. Everything in Workday, or I can say most of the things, or all the things in Workday is an object. In Workday, we refer to them as business objects. For example, worker is a business object in Workday. Sorry, what is called as a business object? A variable. For example, in Java you have something called class. Right? Business object is a class. For example, I am creating a business object called worker. And this business object has a few different things. The first thing is obviously the properties of that object, right? The attributes of the object. What are the attributes of a worker? It would be, for example, his last name, his first name, his date of birth, gender, position. These are all attributes of the object. Attributes in the object. You call it a business object instead of a class. These attributes are represented in terms of the different fields. Each of these attributes are nothing but fields that you have defined on that business object. Or Workday is delivered. If I can quickly show you some business object. Let's look at business objects. We used to work a lot. Whenever you're saying this object is very hard for me to digest, it's a class. For example, let me open job profile, or can I take something simpler? Let me take company. Because we are using company. Company, the data that you see here, this company, ID. This is actually not a text, a static value. This is an object. If I go ahead and open company, a company would have different attributes, right? The company name, the effective date, the members, and on and forth. Every business object has its own attributes. And then, if you see, there are 786 attributes of a business object called company, which would include the company name, the company effective date, employees in that company, contingent workers in that company, and on and forth. The cost center of that company, and on and forth. These are all attributes of a given business object. And then, what do? I have created multiple companies. The search for the Bevo company, and it came with like Bevo company or such. This is how you search for a business object. I want to search for a business object called worker. I can search for worker. But how do I want to see all the business objects available and in my model, data model? You can create reports, or I think there's a delivered report as well. This will still give me one business object at a time. Business object by category. Let me select all and click. This gives me all business objects. Business layer, a kind of a logical layer where I can see all the classes and objects available in this one. Alright, now worker is a business object. Similarly, company is a business object. Position is a business object. And then every employee that I hire in my system is an instance of that business object. Each of my employees or workers is one instance of a business object. If I hire Ravi, Ravi has a last name, he has a first name, he has a date of birth, he has a gender, he has a position, and on and forth. You define the values for each of these attributes of the business object. This is an instance of a given business object. Alright. Similarly, every position that I create in my tenant, in my system, is one instance of the position business object. An instance. Field is nothing but an instance of the business object. If I go in here and look at company, you can see this is a field of type instance. And this is an instance of a business object called organization. Organization is a business object in Workday. Similarly, if I look at supervisory org, these are all different organizations in Workday. Location supervisory org, company cost center. Similarly, if I click on supervisory org, if you see, this is also an instance of the same business object called organization. Can I say that all the classes will be defined as the instance, or all the classes will have instances? For example, you have a car. Now the classic example we used to study in college. Right. I have a class called car. I have different models of cars for all the cars I produce. These are all what you call objects of a class. That's how you refer to it. Here it is different. Your car is a business object, or simply put, an object. And all my cars are the instances of this business object. All the fields you call it as instances. Now, this is a single instance. Now, what is a multi-instance? As I mentioned, there are two types of instances. One is instance, and then I have multi-instance. This worker is associated with this position called Workday consultant. As I mentioned, position itself is an instance of the position. Business object. I have a business object called position, similar to how Ravi is an instance of the worker business object, and Anita is an instance of the worker business object, and some Smith is an instance of the business object, worker business object. These are all instances of the worker business object. Similarly, every position that I have created in my system is an instance of the position business object. I have a position called Workday Consultant. I have a position called SAP Consultant. I have a position called Manager India. I have a position called. How would you say for the multi-instance? What does it mean by multi-instance? I'm coming to that. I am coming to that. I have a position called Sales India and on and forth. These are all positions. These are all instances of a different business object called position. Now, if you see, this instance of the worker business object is associated with this instance of the position business object because a worker occupies a position. There is a relationship between two different business objects. Ravi is associate, which is an instance of the worker. Business object is associated with this particular instance of the position. Business object, which is a Workday consultant. Now this is actually a one-to-one relationship because Ravi is occupying one position. There's a one-to-one relationship between worker and the position. Let me take address as an example. Now Ravi can have multiple addresses. He can have a permanent address. He can have a mailing address. He can have emergency contact address. While Ravi can only be associated with one instance of position, business object, he can be associated with multiple instances of the address, business object. Right. An address and Ravi has one-to-many relationships. This is a multiple instance or multi-instance field and address field. Makes sense. Let me show you. I think I have added a multi-instance field. Additional jobs. Now, this is a single instance, this icon that you see, because a worker can only have one age group. He can only have one management level. He can be a manager, he can be a senior manager. He cannot be both manager and senior manager at the same time. But a worker can have multiple additional jobs. Let me search for additional jobs. Additional jobs is a multi-instance field. Let me add a filter and see. I'm adding a filter. And I want to select only those employees. Let's see what data is returned. If there are additional jobs, is not null. I want to only select those employees who have some additional jobs. All these employees have single additional job. If you see, this is a multi-instance field. Now that's because a given employee can be doing multiple jobs in addition to their primary job. Let me search for some employee. Let's look at Joyce Sandoval as an example. If we look at Joyce Sandoval and then move to the right, if you see, she has two additional jobs. This identifies that this is a multi-instance field. Makes sense. It will show me all of those instances. Got it. Now, because this is an attribute, why is that Workday was automatically able to identify additional jobs as a multi-instance field? Because I created it directly from a custom report. And when I did it directly from a custom report, Workday did that one-to-one mapping. Whenever you create a data set from a custom report, Workday simply maps the Workday field types to the dataset field types. Now Workday would recognize. With respect to currency, one thing to remember, Workday recognizes any currency formats as long as it has the 3-digit currency code. But the currency and the other date, everything you can modify it, but the instant multi-instance, that Workday will decide it right. Workday decides that. Now with respect to currency, Workday needs a 3-digit currency code. What I mean by that is, you can have, for example, 3,000 US dollars or maybe US dollars. 3,000. You cannot say $3,000. Workday would not recognize this currency symbol. Even if this currency symbol is there, still you need the 3-digit currency code. Now, in addition to this, you can use any combination. You can use comma, you can use decimal symbol. That doesn't matter. But it needs a numeric value, a number, and then a currency code. With respect to, there are some field types which are not supported in dataset. Field types not supported. The first field type which is not supported is rich text. Now, for example, when you build a custom report, Workday has something called 2 different types of text fields. One is text and then rich text. Rich text has those additional formatting options as well, right? Tags and stuff. When you write a mail in Outlook, you have basically 2 options, text and rich text. Prism Analytics doesn't support rich text. With respect to data, Workday doesn't support date and time zone format. Anything which has date and then the time zone, that is not supported. Rich text is not supported. Date time zone. Many fields come with that combination. Date time zone, that is not supported. What happens? Your rich text will be simply mapped to text field and your date time zone. The limit of size, right? Rich text will allow you to write it longer. With the more important thing is those formatting options as well. Those tags and formatting and rich text may also include. For example, if you have a rich text mail, you can directly copy a photo in your mail. Right now, all those options are obviously not supported in Prism Analytics. Right? Now the next thing is null fields. If you see, there are a number of fields which have the value as null. Let's see. These are all null. In Workday, there is actually no concept of a null. When I say in Workday, when you finally publish this data set, right? Once you have done all the transformations, all the permutations, combinations, modifications, groupings, everything is done. As I mentioned, the final step would be to publish this data set. Once it is published, then you can create reports in Workday visualizations, discovery boards, and all of that can be done. Now in Workday, there's no concept of a null. What I see here is Prism Analytics. What happens to this null? The null value would be converted into an appropriate field type. This is what Workday does to null values. Workday replaces nulls with these values. When the Prism dataset is published, if you have a Boolean field wherein there is some null value, the Boolean field in the published dataset, the null value will be replaced to false. Anywhere you have the null value in a column which is of type Boolean, Workday would replace it with false. Because, as I mentioned, there's no concept of a null value. Anywhere you have currency, and there you have the null value. For example, let's see quantity. How could it replace the ones, zeros, and ones? Sorry, I didn't get that. No, you said wherever the null values are there, it will replace with Boolean, right? If there is any Boolean field here, we are not having any Boolean fields. Let's say this is a Boolean field. If there is a Boolean field and this field has some null values, for example, let's scroll down somewhere, there would be null. You can put these in. Can you add a filter here? There are many. You have a top values, null is 1%. Right? What I'm saying is if, for example, this is a Boolean field. Now obviously this is not. This is an instance. But just assume the field type of this field is Boolean. When I finally publish this, wherever it finds a null value in published output, that null value would be replaced with a false. With a false. Because in the report there is null value, you have to say that it is not null something. Yes, it will be replaced with false. Wherever there is a currency related field. Now, the reason for that is, as I mentioned, in Workday there's no concept of a null. In traditional reporting, when you do a normal report, forget Prism Analytics. There's nothing called null in Workday reporting. Wherever you have a currency related field, and there, if there is any null value, it is replaced with simply 0. Replaced with 0. For example, we already have these. These are all currency related fields. There is any null value, it becomes. If you see here, usually we define it not null, and if it is null, it is null. Here, if you see, there this is a currency field and 15% of these values are actually null. All of these 15% of currency related fields, they would be replaced with 0 in the final output. Similarly, any date related field, any instance field, any multi-instance field, I think it will keep it as null only. Any text field, all of these are replaced with blank. There wouldn't be any value. And final date as well. A date, I have already mentioned any currency numeric integer. These are all replaced with 0. This is how Workday behaves. That is good to know. Please do like, share and subscribe to our channel.